We'll call a regular meeting of the Planning and Zoning Commission for Monday, February 18th at 6:34. Let the record show Laney Cade and Thomas Duncan are not present. All other commissioners are accounted for in here. Moving on to item 2, the consent agenda. We have a few items on the consent agenda. Item A, consideration possible action, approve the P&Z regular meeting minutes from January 28th. Item B, consideration possible action, final plat of Stewart Heights, Section 23, plat 19-00009. Item C, consideration possible action, final plat of Stewart Heights, Section 24, plat 19-00010. Those are our consent agenda items. Does anybody wish to pull any of those consent items? Hearing none, do I hear a motion for approval of the consent agenda?
Second.
I have a motion and a second. All those in favor signify by raising your right hand. Motion passes 5-0. Moving on to new business, item A. Consideration possible action and approval of 2 irregular shaped lots to allow for the development of property. This is VARP 18-00025. General location on the north side of Bailey Road, 1,500 foot west of Manville Road. Do I hear a motion for approval? Have a motion and a second. Staff report.
This item, the intention of the applicant is to ultimately submit or to have a minor plat submitted that will create 3 lots. 2 of the lots will be irregular lots. 1 of the lots will be a flag lot. But the 2 lots that are irregular lots will be eventually zoned neighborhood services. That's their intention for those 2 front lots. The flag lot to the rear will be a residential lot, but the intended use for the 2 lots to the front of the property will be retail development. Staff recommends approval of the requested variance for the following reasons. According to the criteria found in the UDC, it is consistent with the purposes and intent of the applicable zoning district. However, on this case, we are looking at future zoning of the property since the zoning process has not yet been completed. As for preserving the character of adjacent development, platting is required for the development, but would need to conform to the ultimate zoning of the property. However, even if it were to remain in the extraterritorial jurisdiction, it would still have to be platted, but ultimately with this, the applicant had made a petition to have the property annexed into the city. They're working on getting the property, it'll be zoned. The commercial properties will be neighborhood services. The residential property will be, they've applied for a zoning to RE, rural estates. The properties in questions under this variance request will meet the requirements of the proposed zoning districts. This is an aerial of the property showing it in the extraterritorial jurisdiction at the time it was applied for. This is a map of the minor plat of Seabass Edition. Again, lots 1 and 2 are the properties that the applicant intends for retail development in the future, and those are the properties that will be part of a zoning application to neighborhood services. The large property to the rear is the flag lot. So this specific variance covers 2 issues. One is the irregular shape of lots 1 and 2, and then it also covers the creation of a flag lot, which is lot 3, which is the large property to the rear. And that concludes my presentation.
What is the small cutout section in the back of lot
That is a location of a cell tower.
So it has separate access?
Yes, sir. It'll have access easements to that cell tower site.
Commissioners have any questions? Ready to vote? Okay, hearing no questions, thank you, staff, for that. And all those in favor, signify by raising your right hand.
I could interrupt before you announce the vote. I just wanted to say that this is a variance request. Variance requests do require a public hearing. If I just ask the commissioner to give anybody in the audience an opportunity to come up and speak for or against it before we take a vote on it. Thank you.
So is there anyone in the audience that would like to speak on this variance before the commission? Is there anyone in the audience that would wish to speak on variance 18-00025? One more time for the record, is there anyone that wishes to speak on variance 18-00025? Hearing none, I think we have one question.
Yes, because this is, you say this is has to be a public hearing on this?
Because it's a variance request, we do give the opportunity for the public to speak. It's not, there aren't notices that go out to it, or I don't believe that there were notices for a variance request, other than the notice that gives you the Open Meetings Act compliance notice with the posting of the meeting.
Okay, you said public hearing, and I know that the law requires notice on public hearings, and there isn't any here. So
Correct, sir.
that's my question. Thank you.
Anything else? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by raising your right hand. None opposed, item passes 5-0. Moving on to new business item B, consideration and possible action. Cluster plan of Old Alvin, Bartlett, 24 acres. That's plus 19-00001. This is a request of Alan Mueller of Gromax Development, the applicant, on behalf of Mary Bartlett, owner, for the approval of Old Alvin Road, Bartlett, 24 acres cluster development plan, creating 73 single-family lots and 5 restricted reserves on 23.826 acres of land located on the west side of Old Alvin Road at Jasper Stone Lane. Do I hear a motion for approval? I have a motion from Darrell, a second from Mary. Staff report.
Thank you. This item, as stated earlier, would ultimately create 73 single-family lots and 5 reserves. Since this is a R1 cluster plan, this would create lots that are 60 feet wide and 120 feet deep. This slide shows the configuration of the cluster plan. Most of the open space area would be in the panhandle on the western portion of the property, where the detention basin is located, and also a proposed park. The layout of the lots would be accessed mainly through 2 parallel streets that run east and west. As for the difference between the base R1 zoning and the proposed cluster plan, the minimum lot area required for the R1 zoning district is 8,800 square feet. This would create lots that are 7,200 square feet. The minimum lot width of R1 zoning is 80 feet. This would create lots that are 60 feet wide. However, the minimum lot depth would increase from the requirement of 90 feet to 120 feet. The maximum lot coverage proposed by this cluster plan will be 60%, which will meet the base R1 zoning. As for the analysis, the gross density of 3.2 dwelling acres per unit proposed would be as permitted in R1. This proposal is also compatible with the requirements of R3 single family, which has a minimum lot width of 60 feet and a minimum lot area of 6,000 square feet. However, with this cluster plan, the proposed 7,200 square feet area would be larger than a 6,000 feet area. This would also provide some landscaping along Old Alvin Road, and buffering will be provided that will accommodate a small park and storm detention basin neighboring the retail development to the west. Amenities will be located in a small neighborhood park located between the houses and the detention basin. Property constraints. The small width to depth ratio of the overall tract, which causes an inefficient land plat to meet fire access and separation standards. There's a long, narrow panhandle which cannot be efficiently utilized and which is adjacent to commercial uses. A shallow storm sewer outfall, which translates to a larger detention pond in order to avoid pumped detention. Also, the nearest sanitary sewer connection is approximately 1,600 feet removed, and which has depth conflicts with a storm sewer that would be costly to resolve. Also, a stub street would need to connect to potential future residential uses. This is a list of amenities that would be provided by the cluster plan on this slide, and it also has a list of items that would provide buffering. This slide is basically taken from the UDC, which is section 2.2.44, which provides the 4 factors that are used to look at the requirements for approval of a cluster plan. And then B at the bottom, conditions, prescribes that the Planning and Zoning Commission or the Council on Appeal may impose such conditions on approval of the cluster plan as are necessary to assure compatibility with adjoining uses and neighborhood character. This chart, in looking at the section 2.2.44, we do believe the cluster plan meets the standards for residential density as outlined in relation to the zoning district. Also, as for the cluster plan being consistent with the zoning regulations except for minimum lot size, width, and depth. In this case, the cluster plan exceeds the minimum lot depth but is less than the minimum lot area and width. Also, as for the buffering issue, the neighboring properties to the north and south have commercial zoning, but any neighboring non-residential developments would be required to provide screening between their developments and the residential development. As for the open space issue, if this property had been zoned R3, the applicant would be able to have an increase of 3 acres for residential development without providing amenities. And with a straight R1 zoning, the applicant would not be required to provide extra amenities. Staff recommends approval of the Old Alvin Bartlett 24 acres cluster development plan with the following conditions. First, that a stub-out street be added to allow a connection to any future development to the south. The stub-out may be located at either the south end of the north-south street or it may be mid-block on the southern east-west street. And also that roadway design and construction must conform to City of Pearland requirements. This slide here shows the area that's zoned R1 that this cluster plan would cover. As you can see, this property is surrounded on 3 sides by property that is currently zoned general commercial, and the nearby residential development is to the east on the opposite side of Old Alvin Road. However, the future land use plan shows that the property is shown as low-density residential. So if there were any rezonings to take place on the property to either to north or south, the future land use plan recommends low-density residential So the current general commercial zoning and the future land use plan do not match. And then finally, this is the last slide, which shows the again the layout of the cluster plan, and that concludes my presentation.
Okay. So I've got a list of questions. I'm sure Mr. Mueller here would is going to have to answer a few of them. Just a reminder to the commission, if you're not familiar with cluster development, this is one of the items that this commission sees that the council does not see. So if this leaves here with approval, it goes forward after tonight without going in front of council. Just saying that because what we do here is final. There's not another step for a check or balance.
That's correct.
With that, we've had some of these, not a whole lot of them. I think Alan's probably one of the few people that comes to the commission with cluster developments. We've had a couple others, but so I've got some technical questions on the development, and so one on the detention. What's the overall acreage of detention versus the overall acreage of the wet area?
Ooh, don't know if I can pull that number specifically out of here, but so the overall detention is 4.5 acres, and then so that's in the, you're looking at the top table on the top left of that exhibit. So it says detention area, and there's a square footage, but then it says, I believe that's 4.5 acres, if my eyes are reading correctly. And then the landscaped area, the part, that's the berm that's around the outside that's going to be landscaped, where the trail is going to be. So that's 5 acres. So there'd be 4 acres from the high point of the pond down, so allowing for slopes, probably somewhere in the neighborhood of about 3 acres or so would be actual water.
And this is a non-pump out detention?
Yes, sir. Yes. And you know what? I'm going to have to correct myself. I think we're actually planning for a dry pond, not a wet pond. Yeah. So I'm sorry.
So this is green space.
Yeah. So we're not counting the bottom of the pond as green space. So the 0.5 acres that's listed in the, I guess I'd call it the third column over. That's the perimeter around the top of the berm of the pond where the trail and the landscaping is going to be. So, but the bottom will be dry.
Thus the green color.
Yeah, my colors
versus blue.
I'm sorry. Yeah, my colors on my copier probably didn't turn out very well. But yes, it's green.
Okay. And the depth to the
pond?
Yeah.
I
depth below the sidewalk.
Say that again?
The depth below the sidewalk elevation.
Yeah, so I think they're planning on the bottom of the pond being about 4 to 5 feet down. So, and then along the northern property line where it says drainage / open space, we'll actually have a separate pipe that drains the detention pond back out to the street. And so I think, so we're limited by how deep we can go on the pond based on the depth of the storm in the street and the slopes coming back up.
Okay, even though we can't calculate the acreage of detention, you can't count that for open space. In this case, it will be open space when it's not wet.
Technically, yes, yes. We're not planning any improvements on the bottom, but it in a normal condition, it would be dry. Yes, sir.
Okay. Takes those questions out. What type of fencing is going to be along the property line to the western and southern edge that goes around the commercial properties?
So on the,
Height and material.
I'm going to point up here if that's. So starting here and running north where the red line is, and around. That's all mason. That's a brick, thin wall masonry fence, and then we'll also have the masonry fence along the. Thank you. So this is all the masonry wall, probably brick thin wall, and the brick thin wall is traditional.
And you'll have to, I guess, refresh my memory. Are y'all planning on developing the property to the north?
We don't have any contracts on that property, but in an ideal world, we would, yes, but we don't have any contracts on that property. It's split up into some real long, thin pieces that are, and I think there's 4 or 5 different owners, so it's a challenging.
And the property to the south?
Property to the south is one owner, and then that's part of the Alexander family. And then the city has bought a piece of property about right here for a detention pond, which I think was part of the old Alvin project.
Okay. I guess it wasn't one of your cluster developments, but one of the previous ones we saw, and this comment's for the commissioners. We had a document similar to this with photos of what this is going to look like. It was one that I was really displeased with because we had visuals of what was going to be built. We had a descriptor of what was going to be built. And when when we vote on it, we look at what's in front of us, right? So I go, okay, I'm going out there to look at this after it's built, and I see something that doesn't look anything like what was shown to us, not even close, but it was per the descriptor. So technically they built what they said they were going to build, but it didn't look like what they showed us. So that kind of stuff bugs me. I'm not super concerned with it now that I know there's dry detention versus wet, because you know what? I don't like wet detention and pump out specifically. It's a lot safer design with it being dry. There's a lot more area. I'm assuming that area would be open. And
it'd be accessible, but yeah, we're just not programming any improvements, for the bottom. Just speaking about, cluster plans, it was a different developer, but, or a different builder, but we did the cluster plan directly north of here for Highland Park. So, that's the kind of thing that we're looking for.
right.
And, there's always going to be a difference between the concept and the reality. So, we have a picture of the entry monument. It's probably not going to look exactly like that, obviously, but that's the scale and the quality that we're looking for.
Y'all have any questions? Nothing? Not at all. Hit it again.
I guess one thing this is new to me. I'm used to going through the platting process and the subdivision development and all, and going through the legal process of getting that done. This is quite a bit different from that, in my opinion, at least in my understanding right now. but I'll learn how all this works. On the entry road to the north, why is there a double 90-degree bend in it? What's the purpose of that?
I'm glad you asked, and I have a good an option for you to look at. So that is in relationship to the fire code requirements. And so there's a fire access in the fire code. There's a requirement that says if you take the diagonal of the property and divide it in half, then your two entry points need to be at least that far apart. So basically, the fire code took a code that applies to buildings and translated it to land development. So in this case, because it's a long, skinny tract, if you took that diagonal distance and split it in half, that second entrance would be somewhere up here. And so what we've generally been able to work out with the fire marshal is that if we push it all the way as far as we can, they will accept that. And so it creates that odd kink. Now, when we learned about the request for the additional stub street to the south on late Wednesday, we started working with the fire marshal, and we've tried to come up with an alternative. And so what the fire marshal has said is that if we're going to have these two stub streets, he'd be happy with this street coming straight out, which is really a better solution. So this is hot off the press. Our first plan didn't have the kink, and so when we added the kink, that actually was a loss of 3 lots to do that. And then when we were asked to put the stub street to the south, that was going to be 1 additional. And so that, I know it sounds crazy, but it's at that tipping point where feasibility starts to be a concern. So we lose 1 lot there. We actually gain 3 back. So this is a net 2 more. We're still under the cap. So this results in 75 lots, which the cap would be 76 under the 3.2 units per acre. And so we think this complies with the stub out rules, and the fire marshal has agreed that this layout would be acceptable to him. And frankly, we think it's a better design anyway. So,
Okay.
that was I'm sorry, long answer to a short question.
No, I appreciate it. I guess one question I can ask staff later, if this same situation had been presented as a plat, would that have been allowed, that sort of roadway design? But
Yeah,
it looks like it's resolved at least.
there is a similar situation to that in a property called Southern Oaks off of County Road 48, south of Broadway. And it has the same kink in the road for the same exact reason.
A couple more questions. Because I guess this being new to me on a cluster plan, we're getting involved in, I guess, subdivision design that we're not normally involved in, I would think. What about the restrictions on maintenance on the detention pond, on, how is it going to be maintained? I've seen a lot of detention ponds that are just overgrown and
Right.
not taken care of.
Yeah, this will be maintained by the HOA. We'll create an HOA. And so I think, if you think about the cluster plan, is just, it's an option that's written in the UDC that just provides some options to get to the same net density as the underlying zoning, but with some other, land use options. So everything else in the UDC and the design criteria, everything else stays exactly the same. So this is kind of like an interim step. A lot of cities have a like a site plan approval for commercial properties before they get to, final plats. So this is just kind of that interim, but all the other normal rules still apply. This is just an option that allows for a variation in lot sizes while maintaining the same net effective density.
Okay. Like I say, this is a new concept to me. To me, it would fit into the PUD better than it would just be a cluster plan. But I'm new to this, so I'll become better informed next time. But I think that's all I have right now. Thank you.
From a planning perspective, one of the reasons we want to make sure that the Planning Commission is aware of the issues and satisfied with what's presented with them is so that in the future, when we do get a preliminary plat application and a final plat application, this cluster plan would give us a gauge for how that preliminary plat would conform to the cluster plan.
How wide are the streets?
Standard width street, 28-foot paving, 50-foot right-of-way.
So the city asked you to put in the southern stub street, and I'm assuming the northern one was required?
Yeah, so when we went to the pre-development meeting, I wasn't actually able to attend, but the word that we got back, we actually had a stub street shown going like straight. I'll point up here. We had a stub street just like this one. We had it pointing straight south. And the word we got back from the pre-development meeting was remove the stub street, that it wasn't necessary. I think maybe that was a little bit of miscommunication because that detention pond was there. But the word that we got back was just don't put a stub street to the south. And so during the review process, it came up that he did really want a stub street to the south, so that we've put it back.
But I'm trying to figure out what it makes sense to be on the south side lined up with where you have it on the north, because there's actually a road that lines up with it.
Down here?
Yes.
Yeah, this is where that detention pond is going to be that I mentioned. The city bought this property for a detention pond. Directly, so
it would line up with the other piece of property that you don't own.
Right here, yeah. So I have a copy of the survey, but like I said, the city bought a property here. So if we extended that street straight south, it would go right into the detention. And I'm not sure if it's built yet or if it's just okay.
I may be misunderstanding, and Alan, I know that you've got more experience with these than I do, but I do want to make sure that the P&Z is under the right impressions, and that is that the cluster plan is a deviation from the density requirements. So the interior layout of the neighborhood could change, and they could still meet the density requirements. And I would turn to Alan as a developer and planning and the planning staff to confirm that that's their understanding as well.
The way they've been administered in the past, at least for us, is that this site plan is pretty strict once it gets to the preliminary plat. I mean, things may vary a little bit, but generally it's generally been administered that way. Personally, I think the UDC grants more leeway than that, but that's the way it's been administered, is that it has to fit the cluster plan pretty tightly.
From the legal perspective, I would be concerned then, because we do, if this document that's on the screen now is the document that is approved, then we have that concern that Alan mentioned in regards to the S. I'm sorry, Mr. Wicker asked about in regards to the northern S. We have concern about whether the fire marshal has approved or not approved. The fire marshal's not here tonight. We don't have his notes in front of us. This additional lot layout. I just think that really the focus needs to be on the data inside the diagram. And Mr. Mueller, I would ask, all these tables in here that have the quantities, you don't have any problem with, if planning and zoning were going to agree with approving the cluster plan, tying the approval to the conditions that staff had and using these quantities that are reflected in here, do you?
No, that's our understanding of the intent, right?
Yes.
So all those tables up at the top and then down at the bottom with the 6 feet concrete trail, the open shape, the park concrete walkways, those are quantities that staff would use to enforce when it gets the preliminary plat and the final plat.
That's typically, in my experience, how it's been used, yes. But again, like, for example, like trails and sidewalks don't actually get built till later, much later, but that's part of the subdivision improvement agreement to make sure that those costs are covered in that.
So the main trade-off, the main reason you're here, you receive the R1 zone for the property. You need a much more dense lot width to make this work financially. So we're at R3, 60-foot wide lots. Whether it's a straight entry or a curved entry, the lot count currently was 73. And you said
correct, and with this one it's 75, but the 3.2 gets you to 76. 3.2 per acre.
I don't mind the curves. I think curves are good. You've got 1,000 feet. Was it a little over 1,000 feet straight run?
Correct.
History should tell us that's too much. What's the max on a cul-de-sac?
1,200.
How much?
1,200 feet, 1,200.
It depends on which code you're looking at. Planning will give you a 1,200 figure. The fire department will give you a different figure for its purposes.
Yes.
And engineering will give you a different figure for its purposes. Each of them have a different intent behind it, and the three of them try to get together to make sure that
Why
you
does
can create a
700 come up?
harmonious development.
Why does 700 for some reason come up?
That's the distance in which a fire truck can back up until it meets another intersecting street.
So
Per EDCM and fire code, it's actually 600 feet.
At the block length? Okay. Yeah, so I guess
Right.
if that's the case, I mean, that stub street to the north would probably be better in the middle as well. Sounds like.
That would typically be for a cul-de-sac, though, and because the fire truck can make a
Yeah, I was just talking
Continuous
block,
movement.
I'm sorry, I was pointing off, there's a block length, maximum block length requirement separate from the cul-de-sac. So knowing that, based off of that, I mean, like I said, that northern stub street probably would make more sense to be in the middle to break up that block length as well. So again, if the commission is comfortable with, as Mr. Provins was stating, of approving it with the conditions that are in the document, but not necessarily tying it to a specific site plan, knowing it generally is going to follow this, but those stub streets might be in a little bit different location, and overall, we have to meet all the platting and all the other UDC requirements as well.
you turn your mic on.
Question that I have is whether or not the entryway to the playground, why it wouldn't be in the middle. That's what you were just talking about, correct?
No, I'm sorry. This stub street to the north might be better off being in the middle to break up that long block length, and then this corner would be the little knuckle, kind of like that, like as it is on the south.
That was my concern. That's the question that I had.
Okay.
Before you
Okay.
guys start talking about it.
Your corner lot's normally wider.
The frontage is actually usually a little narrower, but because you measure it at the property line, so at the property line it has to meet the width, but as it necks down, towards the pavement, it'll be a little bit narrower.
Yeah, on the UDC requirements, the block length is 1,200 for the maximum.
I don't have any heartburn over either of the layouts. I'm good with the 73 lots. understanding you don't own the property to the north, so these stub out streets are just going to be dead ends. I thought there was something in the UDC that said we required cul-de-sacs at dead ends.
They may have to be temporary, but generally, if they're short, like the length of a single property, they can be considered a hammerhead and just left as a dead end street.
Yeah, I don't have heartburn over the layout. My main concern was that it's a dry bottom detention. It's not a wet bottom. It's not pump out. If we could add those words to that this is a dry
condition
detention system, make that a condition. Because I don't want it to show up as a wet bottom pump out detention facility. And my history there is being involved with HOA on a similar size lot subdivision. Wet bottom detention ponds are a pain in the butt for a small HOA to take care of. If we can keep 73 residents from having to deal with that,
Right.
that's a good thing. The park equipment, you've listed it. I don't know what's going to end up there. I'm assuming, this is where some trust comes in.
Well, we always assume that if we put it on the list, then we have to do it.
You can make it part of your recommendation for approval.
Well, I understand that, and then everything on this list would be part of that. I'm just saying we got pieces of equipment, quality and all that. You're putting your name on it, so I'm assuming the quality is going to be excellent.
Yeah, I can tell you. I mean, it hasn't been designed yet, but I can tell you our allowance for all of these things is about 3 times what you would normally have. So normally you break these costs in a budget down to a dollars per lot kind of perspective, and so we're planning right now about $9,500 per lot for all of these enhancements that we're doing, the trails, the equipment, et cetera. $3,000 or $4,000 per lot is probably more typical if you're not doing something like this.
So can you bring up staff's conditions above and beyond?
If the Planning and Zoning Commission is looking to approve the cluster development plan, in addition to the recommendations that you see in front of you, the recommendations that I've heard would be to include that the detention be a dry bottom detention pond, and then as I'm suggesting, that the items and quantities listed in the site, I forgot the name of it, site amenity and open space plan as depicted in the application be adopted as minimum standards.
And the masonry wall, is that going to be a stamped concrete wall, or is that going to be a
We've budgeted it as a brick wall, not the precast panel.
single layer?
Yeah, they call it a single wife brick wall. That's how it's been budgeted.
Like I say, if we add the conditions, I am not concerned about the layout. I would like to give them the flexibility of putting that street in the right spot, not just a spot directed by us tonight.
That's always the challenging thing about these is that, you're at a very conceptual level, but you're, locking in specific requirements. And so that's
I like it in the middle of the block.
Right.
Because that also adds some parking, some side street parking there that you would force to the end. But then you have the park. The parking for the park is a couple cars right there at the park. assuming you're going to be walking to the park anyway, shouldn't matter. Assuming the type of home you're planning on targeting is attached garage.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. It's Guillen Homes.
Are these gated? Is going to be gated?
No, not gated.
Okay. So the park would be considered a public park, right?
Well, it's an HOA park. I mean, technically it's private, but anybody could show up and use it. But you would think probably not a lot of public use, but it's possible.
Okay.
There's a state law requirement in the Texas Administrative Code that indicates that HOA parks, unless it's in a gated neighborhood, is open to the public. So
Really? Yeah. I learned something new today.
So would you have any heartburn over us moving that north stub street to the middle to line up with the one to the south?
No, I don't think that should be a problem. Not at all. So that, move this one over here. And so this corner would end up kind of looking like this one down here. Right.
And again, to avoid us having to come back and amend a cluster plan or make changes because the fire department and all the other departments haven't reviewed the location of those streets, we would say that instead of approving the layout as depicted in the site amenity and open space plan, that you adopt the items depicted, the items listed, and the quantities for those items as depicted in the site amenity and open space plan.
And the only other thing I'd ask is, again, that we would just be limited to the 3.2 units per acre as opposed to the specific quantity, because, again, when you get from concept to final, things are always going to shift a little bit. So I don't anticipate going more than 75, which is less than the 76, but if we could limit it to the 3.2 units per acre, then that gives us that flexibility still.
You heard me mention 73, didn't you?
I listen once in a while.
I don't have any heartburn over that. I would like to see it with the two semi cul-de-sacs on the west end, and the two sub streets north and south.
Yeah, we can make that change. I don't think that change shouldn't affect the lot count, but it could knock it down by one. But I'll go with 75 instead of 76 if you want a specific number.
I think 3.2 might be a good number.
3.2 units per acre is a great number. And also, just to keep in mind, we've had this discussion about whether or not there's additional right-of-way dedication required along Old Alvin. And if there is, then that comes off the acreage count before you calculate the density. So that could also knock down the count also. Our understanding is the full right-of-way is there, but we may be wrong.
Just want to mention that the 3.2 is it's the requirement in the UDC.
Right.
So that's a requirement of the UDC. The commission can make it more stringent, but cannot make it relaxed.
Okay, so to move forward, we've got the recommendations from staff. Let's flip back to those and see what makes sense.
So you have those two conditions, and you can also add the items that are depicted on the amenity site plan with the quantities to be also another condition, and moving the north stub to the middle of the block. So you got 4 conditions.
I'm gonna steal one out of Tony's book. Why do we need to make number 2 a condition of approval?
You don't.
Isn't that that's a part of what everybody has to do?
That is correct.
Okay, so why is,
Okay, so we can ignore number 2.
We can eliminate number 2. So
So number one, there needs to be two stub-out streets, one to the north and one to the south. I don't care where they are. I've got a preference, but I really don't care. The staff and the city are saying there needs to be two, so the recommendation should be, or we need to amend the motion to add two stub-out streets, one to the north, one to the south, location to be determined by city staff and the developer to come into agreement. Is that?
And that, yeah, when we get to the preliminary plat, that's when that'll be sorted out. Yes.
Yeah. And the other item is that we add the requirement of the detention to be dry. Just to be clear of what it is. And then the other condition is all the listed requirements of the cluster development on, I forget what page this is of the package.
Would be the items and the quantities
Items and quantities
and the
of amenities.
site amenities and open space.
Oh, there it is. Yeah. Bottom left. And I understand there's pictures there for, and I know going into this right now that it's not going to look exactly like that, but you've listed things that aren't shown in this picture as well. The benches, tables, trash receptacles, recycling receptacles, dog waste receptacles. I don't know timber form swing set from any other kind of swing set.
Yeah, in the past, we were always just asked to provide what they call character images, which was not necessarily a detailed picture of everything, but it was just supposed to give you an indication of the character and the quality. And so that's why those pictures are there.
And understanding those things are very expensive. So we're looking at park concrete walkways and seating areas totaling a 6,885 square feet, 6 foot wide walkways, 6 foot wide concrete walking trail for a total of 1,560 linear feet. That's 9,360 square feet of concrete. An open air shade structure. There's an example above. That looks nice. I mean, if you show up with something from Home Depot, I'm going to be upset with you. And then the entrance and all the requirements along the corridor those aren't really. How much addition are you giving us on the entry along the corridor, the main fence line? What's above and beyond what you would have to do normally?
Yeah, this is not a corridor overlay, so I don't think there's any
corridor, just the street. What are you doing there that is above and beyond what you would normally do
along the entry. The brick wall is above and beyond. That's not required on a street like this. And then we have the landscape reserve, which I don't think is required on the non overlay streets.
Okay. And then all the trees and bushes around the dry detention.
Right, and we've tried to quantify those as well. Those are in the top right. And then also, just so you all know, we all are still working out the sanitary sewer solution. So this is kind of an iterative process. We have to kind of get past this step and see what's acceptable from a land use perspective, and then there's more technical problems to solve as we go forward.
Okay. So I'm hearing we need an amended motion for item 1 for the stub out streets, item 2 for the dry bottom detention, and item 3 tying it to the quantity and type listed on the site amenity and open space plan. I think I captured all 3 of those. Who had the original motion? You did?
Daryl.
So if I was recommending, it would be that we need to do those, amend the motion, or I can do it from the chair. The chair wishes to amend the original motion to add staff recommendation number 1 for 2 stub-out streets, 1 to the north, 1 to the south, the location to be determined between the developer and the city of Pearland upon further development. 2, that we add the requirement of the detention to be dry bottom. In item 3, we tie all the quantity and descriptors for amenities to the site amenity and open space plan presented to the commission. Do I hear a second?
Second.
Okay, so we have an amended motion on the table, or a motion to amend on the table. Any further discussion? Okay, all those in favor of amending the original motion to add those 3 items, signify by raising your right hand. That motion passes 5-0. So now we have the amended motion with those 3 conditions added to the item. Is there any further discussion? I have one question. The 3.2 unit acre is required by the UDC and it cannot be any more.
Yes, sir.
That's correct.
So there is no reason for that to be a condition.
That is correct.
Okay. That was the only item I had. Question? Any other questions? We have amended motion on the floor. There's no further discussion. All those in favor signify by raising your right hand. Motion passes 5-0.
Thank you.
Alan.
Appreciate your time.
Just for clarification, I couldn't quite see or hear. Who made the second on the amendment? Ms. Troy? Thank you.
We all did.
Okay. So moving on to item 4, discussion items. Have commissioners give your report. We have anything to discuss? I've got one item I wanted to bring to the commission and see if I had a second to put an item on the future agenda when it's possible, and that's lighting around windows. The string lighting that we see, the LED lighting that we talk about in just about every CUP that comes in front of us. Seeing a whole lot of this in the city that's now degrading. It was great when it was brand new and it was super bright, different colors, flashing, changing colors. Now you're seeing it where the light bulbs are, the LEDs are getting old, they're burning out. It looks horrible. Not that it looked good to begin with, but now it looks even worse because now it's in bad shape. I've got some photos of these that I'd like to share with the commission later if we can get this on an agenda to discuss, so that we could discuss it further and see if there's anything we can possibly change in the UDC to make this another item for future that we could deal with before it becomes Houston South. A drive up 35, once you leave Pearland, you see a bunch of this, and it's in the state of disarray, and it looks horrible. I'm hoping that we can get that on a future agenda. Is there support for that on a future agenda, that we could at least get a discussion topic to discuss it on the commission?
I would also support. I think it's something that might be handled in the sign or street graphics regulations. I don't know if it's proper for us to discuss if that were the case.
I think I mentioned it to hopefully get it on the agenda so we can discuss it in a public forum next. Is there support for that? So I know y'all are busy. But if we could look at that, getting that onto an agenda in the next month or two, that would be good, at least for discussion purposes. Anything else? Next P&Z meeting, February 25th, after the JPH. So it looks like we have a JPH too. Anything else? I'll move we adjourn at 7:33.